All right, our next presenter needs no introduction. Sorry. Ryan has several books out on Amazon that you should check out. His first book, Monsters All the Way Down, is a horror book, but it's a lot of fun horror, if you're into that. Then his next book, Four Color Bleed, is superheroes, and it's a fabulous world that he's created. He should have been a writer for comic books, but this fulfilled and scratched that itch. And his next book that he's working on is that I think is the impetus for this presentation, is about a man who's a robot, or is he? So if you've never read any of Ryan's writing, it's quirky, it's fun, he has a unique voice, and you recognize it instantly. And Ryan and I have been friends for a while, and he's a great guy. Welcome.
Thank you, Mike. I got to tell you, if you ever need any help, Mike is a great person to talk to. He has an incredible taste in writing, and he's really helped me out. I've learned a lot of what I've learned since I've started coming to, it's Texas High Plains Riders now. It's because I've gotten to know Mike, so thank you, Mike. Oh, wow, golly gee. Well, Mike already told all this information, so I don't have to go over that too much. I will say that I'm very proud to announce that I have finished the first draft on my next book. It is taking forever. Oh, thank you. That one is tentatively called The Great American Robot Novel. And I put so much work into finally finishing that first draft that I wanted to share it with y'all in this presentation. Now, let's start with, we're talking about how to finish your first draft or die trying. I'm sure some of you have thought that this is going to be it. This is the book that's going to finally kill me. You know what I mean? We've all been there. But I first wanted to share you the dangers of taking too long. The first one is your idea finds someone new. This idea, Bethany Claire actually mentioned this, and I like that better than someone steals your idea. Because let's be fair, we're nothing special. Anybody can have an idea, but if you don't do anything with it, and someone else does, you don't really have that much of a right to be mad. Someone is currently DC Comics. For years, I was like, I should pitch this one series to them. Nah, they'd never do it. And they're currently on issue 10 because someone else pitched the same idea and they did it. The next one is, if you give enough time, you honestly kind of become a different person. The robot novel, the idea came years and years and years back. And then I finally figured out how to use it probably about 2 or 3 years ago. And I was working on it, and then life happened. And the next thing you knew, a couple of years had passed and the novel wasn't done, and I wasn't the same person as when I'd started it. And so I couldn't make the novel gel together, if that makes any sense. When you change, your writing changes. And if that's between books, that's great. But if it's on the same book, it can be really jarring. The real world changes. One of the things that was a science fiction element in my current novel is no longer science fiction. The FDA approved it in 2017 after I'd written that book, that part of the book. So the real world will catch up. And that's not just for sci-fi. Real world events can also happen. The real world can change and it can make your novel outdated. So get it done. And then you'll be like a prophetic voice instead of we already know that. You lose your enthusiasm and can't get it back. I think we've probably all experienced that on one level or another. That is one of the worst things. We're going to talk about that more in depth in a little while. Computers will eventually get better at writing than people. They're becoming better lawyers, and they're becoming better doctors, and eventually we're all going to be replaced. Hopefully it'll be a long, long time. But finish your book before that happens. You listen to your mother and go back to business school. Or, yes, I'm just trying to scare you. These are things that most of these things are pretty realistic, and we're all struggling with avoiding them. FFS, just finish. Of course, that means your first draft is foundational, it is fixable, and it is a success, okay? So FFS, just finish. So foundational, here's why you want to get this. The thing about your first draft, I writing is sort of my second job right now. My first job is also writing. I'm a freelance writer and I make a lot of websites. One of the ones I made recently was for a national brand, and I was really happy with how it turned out. I got this draft done, and of course I didn't turn in my first draft for a professional job, but I got the draft done, I worked on it, I took some input, I fixed it up some more, and then we handed that over to the clients. And then a dozen people proceeded to go in and nitpick every single word, change things around, and at one point my client on the agency side, he said, I'm sorry, you turned in great work, they're just kind of tearing this thing apart. And I go, no, I don't mind one bit, because the thing is, anyone can tear something apart. You know what I mean? The great thing about a first draft is, the hardest thing about the first draft is it's something out of nothing. It's the foundational part. You can pay someone to edit, you can pay someone to publish, but that first draft, if you don't do it, no one's gonna do it. Of course, there's ghostwriters and things like that, but that's their book. In my opinion, it's not really your book anymore. It's fixable. On the same vein is, once you have it done, you can do things to it. I often say you can fix anything unless there's nothing to fix. Mm-hmm. So you have to get that novel. Once your first draft is done, it can always be improved. And it's a success. When I finally finished that first draft after however many years, it felt euphoric. All right? That's not the euphoric feeling. You can't always count on that. Sometimes you finish it and you're just like, great, now I can take a nap. But it is something you can celebrate. And that's something we've talked before, your family doesn't always understand, your friends don't always understand, but everybody can say, oh yeah, you finished a book. Well, good for you. So that's a success that shows up for other people. Now, how things get done. I've thought about this a lot because I'm terrible at getting things done. All right? I will look at a building or a television commercial or just anything, and I'll say, how the heck did that even happen? Sometimes I wonder how anything happens. How does anything get accomplished at all? Because it seems impossible when so many things can get in the way. And in truth, most things don't happen because things get in the way. So when something does take place, that's worth celebrating. How things get done. There's passion, there's obligation, and there's discipline. Now, the problem with this is that some of these things run out. For instance, passion. It doesn't matter how excited you are about a book. The thing about writing a first draft is it takes so much time that eventually that passion is going to run out. There are going to be times you don't feel like doing it. If you're waiting for inspiration, you're going to be waiting a long time. Those first 10,000 words might just fly out. But by the time you're getting to 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 100,000, you can't just depend on, oh man, I'm going to be real excited tomorrow. And that's not how that works. Obligation. I know Christine talked about this, and it was really good to hear it from someone else. The thing about writing, and I think I've mentioned this before, is that you can't depend on other people to encourage you to do it. I have people who really like my writing. I have a wife who is incredibly supportive. I have all of you here, and we talk and encourage one another. But the thing is, none of you are going to force me to write my book. Eventually, we'd all like to get to a point where other people's livelihoods depend on us being successful. You know what I mean? If Stephen King decided just not to write a word for 6 months, there'd be people who would say, hey, Stevie, how can we help you out? There's people who literally their careers depend on him continuing to have output. But there is no one like that for me. I mean, and not just self-published, but when you're first publishing and your first few books, unless you're wildly successful, no one is going to hold your hand and force you to do these things. It's not like you're Ryan Gosling and you don't make curtain call for your television series or movie series. I don't even know what I'm talking about. But you don't make if you don't show up on set, someone is going to show up and they're going to make sure, and they're going to toss you in the shower if you're hungover and drag you along. None of these things are going to happen for us. There's no one who is going to make you sit down and write, which is why we get to discipline. All right? And There are so many people who would think, if the people who know me best, if they said, Ryan is going to talk about productivity, he's going to talk about self-discipline. But that's why you want to hear it from me. Because I mean, if it was easy for me, I wouldn't be able to talk to you about it, because I'd say, oh, it's easy, you just sit down. You just do it every day. I've talked to a lot of writers. Oh, I write 5,000 words in the morning. That's fantastic. I do not. But those people can teach us many other things, and this is something I can probably help you along with, just because I've made every possible mistake. But discipline. The thing about discipline is you can force that. You can't force yourself to feel passionate. You can't force there to be obligations. I've given myself so many deadlines and then just blown past them. Nothing happens. No one cares. The thing with discipline is you can set that in place and just force yourself to do it. And it's miserable and it's lame, and who cares, because you're going to have a book at the end of it. If you force yourself to do it long enough, I'm not going to say you're going to like it, but if you force yourself long enough, you'll have a book. And the nice thing is, discipline will help with both of those things. Discipline will help you meet your obligations. Discipline will help you finish the project before you run out of passion. All right? And that's one of the great things about it. Here's my mathemagic formula. A book equals time times words squared. Or rectangle. Books can also be rectangles. All right? So literally the only thing that will get you to the end of a book is spending time and creating words. It sounds so simple, but it's the least simple thing in the world some days. All right, so how do I discipline? All right, that can be a complicated question, but today we're just dealing with this. Be deliberate, all right? When I look, almost everything in writing I think can be improved by being deliberate, all right? We can be Bob Ross and have happy little accidents, but we have to be painting to have those accidents. So how do I discipline? Designate your writing time. Be consistent. Be productive. Actually produce things. Get enough rest. I can't tell you how many days I've ruined my writing. Not ruined my writing, but ruined my probability of being productive by just staying up too late the night before. I don't know how many of you do that. I'm a night owl. I could stay up till 3 a.m. every morning and sleep till like 9, and that would be glorious. But my life keeps getting in the way. So I'm not able to do that. So if I don't get enough rest and if I don't make myself go to bed, I can really ruin a writing day. My wife loves a podcast, I think it's called Before Breakfast. And the woman on that podcast said, going to bed early is how grown-ups sleep in. That's right. And I've never been so furious as when I But it's also true. So get enough rest, and I think you'll be surprised how much your productivity improves. Plan your days off. I don't know how often you've sat down to write and you go, you know what? I deserve a break. Maybe that's just me. It's hardly ever true, but I tell it to myself all the time. And so if you don't plan your days off ahead of time, it's easy to just give yourself a day off. And before you know it, oh, I gave myself too many days off and my book is never done. Set goals and strive for them. And if all else fails, bribe yourself. All right? Say, you know what? I did this on Friday. I said, if I finish this chapter in time, I will go get a pizza. A cauliflower crust. I'm working on losing some weight. But I got that was my reward for finishing the chapter. And little bribes are a great way to get yourself to do things. You know what? If it gets me a finished book, I'll do it. Might get expensive though. All right. This is something I'm a big proponent of, and I've disagreed with several people on this in the past, and if this isn't how you work, I understand. If you're finishing your books, keep doing what you're doing. I don't want to mess that up. My friend Jonathan Baker, he was a guy, he was in our anthology last year, and he moved to Maine recently, but my friend Baker, he goes back and he kind of perfects each chapter as it goes. And that works for him, and he finishes books. But that does not work for me. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the story of Orpheus. It's my favorite myth. There was a guy named Orpheus. He played a lyre, or a little harp. He was a musician, and he married Eurydice. And Eurydice died. I'm butchering this story, and it's one of my favorites, but I'm just going to tell it quickly. But Orpheus decided to descend into the underworld and bring her back. It's a beautiful story. I encourage you to do it. I'm about to spoil the ending. All right, but this is a myth that's thousands of years old, so we're going to just deal with it. But in the story, he travels to the underworld, and he speaks to the Lord of the underworld. And the Lord of the underworld says, "You may take your lover back to the land of the living. But what you must do is you must travel on foot to the exit, and she will follow behind you. But if any time you turn back and look at her, you will lose her. Do not look back." And so Orpheus travels, and it takes forever, and it takes a long time, much like writing a book. It took forever to get to the end and get to that exit. But just as he reached the exit, he started to think, what if she's not really there at all? And he turned back, and he watched her pulled back into darkness. Yeah. So don't look back. This is my strategy for doing that. First off, always move forward. As long as you're putting words on the page, you're getting close to a finished book. Ignore doubt. The other way to say this would be to turn off your critical mind. All right? The critical mind will have a field day with editing. But for right now, your critical mind is not helpful. Your critical mind will get in the way. Okay? It will paralyze you if you keep thinking, oh, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. Who cares? Just keep writing. Move forward. Write it once and move on. Writing is rewriting, but writing your first draft is not rewriting. Okay? Writing your first draft is just writing. Write down changes or ideas in a separate file. This is a hack that I've been using for a long time. When I write a book, I keep something called a supplemental file. I keep it in Google Docs. And what I do is if I have a change and I think, oh man, I really should have done this in chapter 3 because I'm doing it, I need to have it set up for chapter 7. I do not stop and go back to chapter 3. Instead, I just write chapter 7 as if it's correct in chapter 3, and then I make a note in my supplemental file to go back and fix it. Why do I do that? Well, because if I do that, I can make those changes all at once. And let me explain. If you go back and you change something and you keep going back and changing things, you're going to change the same thing several times. Yeah, you're going to get stuck in a time loop. The first time, I've said I've got 2 novels out. I actually had 1 novel that never happened before that. I think many of us probably do. And I went back and I changed the point of view in that novel 4 or 5 times. So I would go back and I changed the point of view every time. Now, that sounds stupid now, but at the time it made perfect sense. And every time I did it, I go, oh, this makes perfect sense. And then I'd read a book in third person, I'd have to change it. And I go, oh, third person would be perfect for my novel. If I just kept going, I would have finished that book 3 times over. Make your changes all at once. And then last, I'll fix it in editing. All right, this goes back to it being foundational. I really love bad movies. Does anyone else love bad movies? Yeah. Ed Wood, I legitimately love Ed Wood, all right? And Ed Wood and the guy who did The Room and all of these other schlock directors that I love so much, something they would always say on the set is they would say, we'll fix it in post. We'll fix it in editing. If you realize you have a huge plot hole in chapter 1, who cares? Just keep going. You'll fix it in editing. Just make sure to note it in your supplemental file because you might forget and then, yeah. Just leave a little note for yourself. By the way, nothing makes sense before chapter 3, okay? So you'll fix it later procrastination is kind of what we're trying to avoid. But in this one part of your first draft, procrastination is the king of getting it done. Worry about it later. All right, I'm just going to go through. I've got way too many of these. We won't spend too much time, but these are my writing hacks from a hack writer. Train yourself. We talked about scheduling your writing time. If you write at the same time every day, you will eventually find it easier to slip into that mode. All right? It's like brushing your teeth. I appreciate the benefits of brushing my teeth, but I don't necessarily enjoy it. I know some people do. we're all strange in our own ways. I can handle that. But you train yourself, and eventually it would become a habit, and habits make things easier. Form or find a critique group. That helps because that also adds an obligation. You have to have something to give. If you show up like 3 or 4 weeks in a row to your critique group with nothing, it starts to weigh heavy on your soul. And guilt is a great motivator, all right? Change your location. I know this is about first draft, but here's an editing thing. When I was working on 4-Color Bleed, the editing for that book was a nightmare. It literally has probably over 100 characters in it. Most of them aren't that relevant, but they're there because the world's big. It was my attempt at like a Tolkien-esque fantasy, but as a superhero thing. Too many characters. So editing it was kind of a nightmare. One day, I finally took my laptop and I went to a coffee shop and I sat there for 4 hours, and I got more editing done in 4 hours of just sitting there having tea and toast than I did in 3 weeks just sitting in my office trying to hack through that thing. Sometimes changing your location is magic. Switch up your process. If you have been writing in the morning, write in the evening. I know that conflicts with train yourself, but we're doing everything we can until something sticks. Switch up your process. Get a standing desk or whatever. Do something new, because if you're trying to do something new, that means you're writing. So that'll help too. Warm up. I found that a lot of times just the act of writing something will make it easier to write what I want to write. I know Mike is working on a 1-act play for the Centennial, and I'm sure it'll be fantastic because I've worked with Mike before when we did some did some short plays, and I was having a lot of trouble getting started on that. And then one night I was writing for my day job, and I was just working on a website for someone. And I worked on that website, and it was so boring to work on that website. But then about halfway through, I suddenly realized I was on fire. You know what I mean? I suddenly realized I was productive, and I suddenly knew what my play was. So I hit pause on my day job, and I rattled out the whole play in 2 hours. It was fantastic. And I really, really loved how it ended up because I had warmed myself up. Some people do writing exercises, people do different things. Warm up and it will help. New chapter, new file. This is a trick I picked up from a friend. What you do is each time you finish a chapter, start a new file, and that'll keep you from going backward. All right? I know it's a strange little trick, and it's one more thing you have to back up your work. It's one more thing you have to back up, but it helped me not feel the weight of it all. And the file opens faster, so there's that. Pavlovian playlist. When I make one of the things I like to do when I'm writing is make a playlist of music that relates to it. And I know this sounds silly, but then when you start that playlist, it's a mind trip. It's just like the habit of, oh, this is the music I listen to while I write my magical epic books, or whatever. But try that, and it also gives you something you can blog about. People kind of like hearing about playlists, and you can write about it in your afterwards. Say, here's the music for this book. Some people get a real kick out of that. Alternate projects. Have more than one thing going at once, so if one stalls up, you can jump over to the other. This is one of those things where if it doesn't work for you, do not do it, but if it does work for you, do. Isn't that helpful? Chandler's Law. If you get stuck, there's this old gag. Raymond Chandler, he wrote hard-boiled detective fiction. And did you mention this in yours, Rick?
No, but I know what it is.
Okay. This is something, and I probably mention every time we do this, but Chandler's Law is basically if you don't know where to go in your story, have someone walk into the room with a gun. All right? Now, that doesn't work in every genre, but the equivalent does. Your stories are driven by conflict, so if you can inject new conflict, it will help you know what to do. It will move things forward. Use placeholders. People get hung up on the names of their characters. That no longer is a problem for me because I know that what they're named in the first draft might not, it's probably unlikely they'll still be named that later. So I don't have to get caught up in it. I don't have to hit pause and say, oh no, what's going to be the name of this supermarket chain? Because I could spend 4 hours saying, oh man, what would be a good supermarket chain? Because I love doing that stuff. We all do. But it doesn't matter at the time. I can do it at the end, so just use a placeholder. When I do I do whatever it is. Sometimes I put it in all caps and I add 3 asterisks. And then I know that if I Control F on my Word document and I can't find any more asterisks, then I fixed it. But not always. All right, use a randomizer. A randomizer, I'm a seat of my pants writer, and we'll talk about that more in a second. During 4-Color Bleed, I had 2 of my heroes escaping a doomed situation, and then I realized I never figured out where they were supposed to go. And that was a problem, because otherwise it's the end of the book, isn't it? So what I did was I have something in my office. I had a bag full of story dice, and story dice have pictures on the different sides, and they are just icons. And I said, you know what? Couldn't hurt. And I rolled those dice, and one of them told me where to send my characters next. It didn't just say it, but it made something click. So find a randomizer. Story dice are cheap. You can get them at the Walmart, I think. But there are other ways. There are websites that can do a randomizer. You could create your own. You could spin a wheel. Anyway, a little chaos goes a long way. Rewards and consequences. I talked about bribing yourself. Someone said, I read someone, they had to donate to a charity if they didn't make a deadline for themselves. And that's a win-win, I guess. But once again, it can get expensive. Don't end a chapter. We talked about the beauty of cliffhangers is it keeps people going. The author version of the cliffhanger is only as writing the beginning of the next chapter. Does that make any sense? The author version of the cliffhanger is starting the next chapter so that when you sit down again, you already have a head start and you have the ball rolling. That's just a neat trick that I really like. The outline, just enough. Like I said, I don't laboriously outline before I write, but if I know I'm going to have limited time to write, or if I've been struggling to make my word count, I will outline just enough. So I'll outline what I need to get through that day, and then it's just filling in the blanks, which is, I guess, why productive people outline usually. Just a couple more. If you don't usually plan, put this down before I get in trouble. If you don't usually plan everything out, try planning it out. If you don't usually fly by the seat of your pants and you're stuck, fly by the seat of your pants and just try writing for a little while. It doesn't have to be your new process, but it might break you out of a funk. Fast draft or zero draft. This is one of those things where if it works for you, try it, do it. If it doesn't work for you, don't. But some people are big proponents of just get it out there. Really, really, really messy. And just, it doesn't even have to be close to a finished first draft. And then you have something you can, once again, it's sort of like the halfway to a first draft. And then you can just go back, and it might only be 6,000 words. And then you can go back and do it. It might be the seat of your pants version of the outline, to be honest. Skip around. I think someone already mentioned that today, but where if you don't know what you want to write, if you can't get into the scene that's coming next, write the scene after it, or write the scene you've been thinking about. If you never want to write that scene, it's probably a boring scene and you don't have to worry about it anyway. Waste time effectively. I'm really good at wasting time ineffectively. But wasting time effectively would be if you were sitting down to write and you just realized today is a bust. And sometimes that can happen, and that can be okay. You can still use that time effectively. Read a really good book on writing. Work on editing something else. Do one of the other things that is still a writing job, and don't just play on the internet. We'll get to that in a minute. Plan breaks. That doesn't mean when your plan goes to heck in a handbasket. That means plan times to stop. Some of the days where I do a real long monotonous writing, I will plan, okay, I'll work for an hour and then I'll take 10 minutes. All right? Working is a job. Working is a job. Thank you for that insight. Writing is a job. It's hard work. So give yourself a break. Don't expect to be able to keep plowing through for 10 hours. Give yourself those breaks, get a snack. Set a timer. This is something I do a lot when I am working when I'm writing copy for websites. I will, if I've been sitting there for 20 minutes and just have not really gotten started, I will set a timer for 15 minutes. And then I will just start, and then I'll start it, and then I will do nothing but work for those 15 minutes. All right? And before I know it, I'm done with the job, and I hit snooze or I turned off the alarm and didn't even realize it. Because once I got going, I was going. So that's a mind trick that works with me, but I am easily fooled. So it might not work for you as well. No internet. I know this sounds so obvious, but I have to tell myself this all the time because I think, oh man, what was the word for that? What was this? And so I'll Google it, and before I know it, oh, it's tomorrow again. So what I would a lot of people do different things. I know Mike, you got a typewriter recently, right? Yeah, you could work on a typewriter. I know that sounds crazy. You could work freehand. If you need a break where you're away from the internet, there are also a lot of there's writing software that will just keep you out of the internet or give you a simpler interface. Since I have a supplemental file that I add to, I will let myself leave that open, but I'm not allowed to open anything else. One of the things I do is if I absolutely have to Google something, because it does happen, because I can't remember basic English sometimes, I will use my phone and I will do it real quick, and then I'll put my phone up, because playing on your phone for some reason feels stupider than on the computer. Sorry, one of these things is whatever works, all right? I would also, I forgot to write this down, but along with no internet is, I recently bought a bunch of thesauruses from a thrift store. And I have found that using a thesaurus instead of going and using synonym.com or whatever is not only finds me better words, but it keeps me off the internet. So a thesaurus might be the trick you need. Okay, so what stands in the way of finishing your first draft? I wanted to just take a minute and make everyone feel very uncomfortable. And if you could just talk with, what I want you to do is I want you to form small groups of like 2 or 3 people. All right, if there's a group that just absolutely has to be 2 or absolutely has to be 4, I don't care, you do whatever you want. But form a small group, and I want you to, if you are currently working on a first draft, or if you know a problem you've run into, I just want you to share it with one another. And then I want you guys to discuss with each other a possible solution as a small group. Does that make any sense? All right, so get to know your neighbors, and I'll give you guys about 5-7 minutes to do that.